Hi again, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your dinner. I'm not going to beat around the bush. Please join me in welcoming Greg and Jim Pethokoukis to the stage.
Thanks very much for having me, and it's really a delight to get very much Jim Pethokoukis. We dialogue and talk, and we tweet at each other all the time, and now I get to actually talk about this book, which I had the pleasure of reading recently. Recommended to everybody, and which I would do even if I wasn't here to talk about it. But it's a fun book, and there's so much in here that, like, I think it bears so directly on the here and now, and all the stuff that we're going to be talking about at this event, at this conference, potential for technology and science to really solve a lot of those intractable problems, to restore sustainable economic growth and so forth, and the things that get in the way. And I want to start right at the beginning, because I think what I find most intriguing about your approach, Jim, is that like we economists usually, when we ask ourselves, why has economic growth slumped since the 60s and the 70s? We look for economic explanations, right? We sort of say, well, we look at, is it capital investment? Is it labor force quality? Is the level of R&D spend? But in your book, you add another dimension, and for want of a better word, it's attitude, right? It's basically, how do we think about the future? Do we think about it optimistically or pessimistically? And in your book, you create what is this interesting taxonomy to describe these two different attitudes, upwing and downwing. Describe to me what upwing and downwing means and why they matter.
Well, thanks for having me here, and I'm just delighted to have Greg here. I did not invent those terms, though I may have mildly repurposed them. But what I think of upwing, and I think of these sort of a left-right scale, I think doesn't always work so well, and doesn't work so well for the purpose of my book, which is to talk about an attitude where you believe that human beings have the tools, the wisdom, and the agency to solve big problems. We can do stuff and we can make the world better, versus an attitude that says, we shouldn't try. Better safe than sorry. We need to do less. We need to retreat. And I think those two views, and you can find them on the left and on the right these days. To me, that is the key division in politics. And if you think that there are big problems that we need to solve, and science and technology and us doing things in the world to help solve those problems, if you think that, then you're on the upwing side, whether or not you might also be on the left or on the right.
So do we as a nation go through cycles where the upwing philosophy is ascendant in politics and policy, and then other cycles where the downwing is ascendant? Because that's sort of the sense I get from you. It feels to me that reading your book, you feel like we were an upwing society until sometime in the late 60s or the 70s, and we've been sort of downwing ever since. Is that fair?
I think certainly those immediate post-war decades were decades which we thought we could solve big problems, that America could do just about anything. And I think that changed. And I think that started changing maybe in the late 60s, starting in the early 70s. One thing I do in the book is I think culture matters. I think what we say through our art about the future matters. And I talk a lot about science fiction in the book and how we went from very optimistic science fiction movies in the 1960s to nothing but an unending series of films showing, overpopulation, Climate Run Wild, Soylent Green, where I'm like about the 50th anniversary of Soylent Green. Though I think the fact we saw the shift in those kinds of films, in one way suggests, I think, a greater attitude. And obviously in a more substantive way, rejecting nuclear power, I think that's a very downwing attitude. And just when I think like that these are things from like the past, maybe the book is kind of stuck in the past, for about 15 minutes maybe, we got to enjoy this kind of AI breakthrough and talk about all the great things it might do, boost productivity. And then it's going to take all our jobs, and when this AI takes all the jobs, it's going to murder us all. And that's kind of what we need to pause it. So all these debates about progress and precautionary principle or a principle of taking greater risk, these are very live debates, I think, in the political economy today.
So, it looks to me that like the way the upwing philosophy or the downwing philosophy manifests itself is often interacting towards regulation. And you point out that a lot of important things came along in the 70s, like Richard Nixon, of all people, like signs into law the National Environmental Planning Act in 1970, I think. He also creates the Environmental Protection Agency, as I recall. I think it was around this time also the Nuclear Regulatory Commission came into existence. So this was a period of a lot of sort of new regulation. And this wasn't necessarily economic regulation, but it was definitely like safety and type of regulation. What does that tell you? Like, was there a societal decision at that point that we were going to start elevating, safety over other things, that the precautionary principle becomes the default position of this?
Yeah, I don't think it is surprising that as the United States become wealthier, and we see this in other countries, that society starts thinking a lot more about the downsides of economic growth. So the fact that we had an environmental movement and even greater regulatory attention to pollution, I think that would have happened anyways, no matter what. So I think the question to ask is, did we need to get this version of the environmental movement? Do we need to get this version of the regulatory approach? So I think we got a natural emphasis on the downsides of growth, which again I think was going to happen anyways, combined with this sort of bizarre cultural fear that we were going to use up all the planet, that we are going to overpopulate the planet. These two things came together, I think, and I went into this book not wanting to be like, oh, the conservative right's like the anti-environmentalist book. Oh, that's shocking. But the more I looked at it, I realized that we were going to get an environmental movement. We didn't have to get this one. We could have gotten one that thought about technology as a way of solving environmental. I mean, that's sort of the issue of technology. You solve a problem, and maybe that technology also causes a new problem, but then it solves that one too, but we keep moving forward. That's not the one we got, and it would be great if going forward, that is a version of the environmental movement that has a lot of substance and influence in American society.
So I do want to sort of challenge the premise that regulation is a source of why we grow more slowly. So the things that you're talking about, we created those in the 70s, a long time ago. And in the 70s, supposedly we deregulated a lot of things like airlines, and I would, this is an aside, going back, I love the stuff y'all have in the book about pop culture, so many references to movies and so forth. And the epitome of techno-optimism in the late 60s was 2001, A Space Odyssey, right? And most of us, or certainly I can, anybody who's seen that movie remembers the iconic space shuttle docking to the space station, and on the tail fin, Pan Am, right? Because in the 1960s, Pan Am epitomized the most innovative.
Surely what was ever going to happen in the future, Pan Am was going to be at the heart.
That's right, because they were the most innovative airline, right? The first to use a 707, the first to order a 747, the first to use a computer.
Unbeatable airline.
Amazing food and so on. And 20 years later, bankrupt. And let the record show they blame deregulation. That's why I point that out. Okay. But more to the point though, can we plausibly say that 50 years after that wave of regulation, that's still why it's going on? I mean, I can hear sort of the liberal chorus saying, oh, you conservatives, you blame regulation for everything.
Two things. One, I also mentioned in the book, just as an aside, a very bullish report put out by Lehman Brothers in 1999, in which they said the go-go 90s, which is an upwing period, it's going to last forever. We have nothing but faster growth and prosperity ahead of us. Of course, Lehman Brothers did not quite make it another decade after that. But I think you can say that. I said, that's yesterday's story. A lot has happened over the past half century. But just to use one example, I just wrote about a story about a company in Port of Albany, New York. They want to build a new factory to make wind turbines. Not where the wind turbines are going to be, they're going to make the wind turbines. And I guess we need 34 of these factories to build all the wind turbines that we're going to need under these net zero plans, but we all have one of those factories. So we need 33 more. And this thing has stalled. The costs have gone up twice what they imagined. They're way behind schedule. And why? Because one, you have sort of this citizen voice thing, which started during NEPA, which local groups could complain and delay projects. And they had huge delays with the National Environmental Protection Act. I mean, this is we have a sort of a brand new effort here, still half a century later, bogged down by these same regulations. And I would say there were some modest reforms during the Trump administration, which the Biden administration has reversed, which, that isn't great. So I think that remains important. I think that not understanding that and valuing how these bad decisions we've made continue to plague us.
Also, in fairness, so there's a lot more going on than just the NEPA. There's all the stuff at the state and local level, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's baby NEPAs also, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, the expression I've heard is that these laws and these mechanisms create veto points. They just create entry points for people, irrespective almost of their reason, to get in there and stop the process. I mean, I recently wrote about this subject of critical minerals, for example, and somebody said, well, Democrats are the ones who don't want us to build lithium mines and so on. And I pointed out there's something called the Clean Line Project, which was meant to actually take wind from wind farms in Oklahoma to the southeast Florida, United States, Florida, and so on. And it was blocked by Arkansas, by Republican governors, legislators in Arkansas, because homeowners didn't want these power lines crossing their property. So I think this kind of reinforces the point, which is basically NIMBYism, or whatever you want to call it, or downwind safetyism, is not easily pigeonholed as a left or a right thing. It's just that you've empowered people to. Yeah.
I think one reason I have some optimism is that you are seeing some people on the left sort of embrace this issue. Now, I also worry that the number of people on the right who would be for this are declining. They've been at the very same time, which is not great. And one reason certainly I wrote the book was to kind of re-inject this attitude into sort of a center-right politics, which seems to be focusing far too much on sort of economic nostalgia and writing about how things were better in 1964, and it's too bad all our sons can't go work in the Gary steel mills, though most of those politicians will not work in the Gary steel mills.
Yeah, let's turn to the politics, because it's a really fun part of the book. So you argue quite persuasively that, in your view, the real cleavage in ideology and policy today is not left versus right, Democratic versus Republican. It's effectively those who are opposed to progress, which you can find on the left. It's the degrowth movement, the anti-capitalism movement. And on the right, in fact, you have a term for this. I haven't heard this before. Bioconservative, is that the?
Again, I stole that.
Oh, did you?
But it's,
all right. Well, I got to read from it because it's great. It's like, for those bioconservatives, Silicon Valley is a transhumanist fifth column pushing America and the world to a post-human future where bugs are a dinnertime staple and we all live packed tightly together in impossibly high super skyscrapers.
if any of you look at the Drudge Report, at least I think for at least the past 15 years, any mention of Silicon Valley or technological progress will certainly most of those stories involve they're going to make us all eat bugs and we're all going to be living in tubes in skyscrapers. That is the future being given, the image of the future being given to a lot.
Don't forget they're taking our gas stoves away too. That's part. But I think but the point you think, by the way, so you actually come up with names for these parties. So you want to create two political parties. The downwing party will be called the Populist Progressive Party. That's nice, like getting both the far left and the far right, keywords in there. And your party, or the upwing party, will be the Progressive Prosperity Party. Great, because you get essentially the opposites on the left and right in there. So I propose that you see that for the presidential candidate for the downwing party, you seek out Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He captures that. My question to you is, who should be the nominee for the upwing party?
I jokingly said, unfortunately, we rules, the Constitution prevents it. Elon, Reeve, Musk. But there isn't anybody else. There really is not an obvious. If you're going to go back, you would say something about Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich, and he loved futurism. Alvin Toffler wanted to build the moon colony. in 2012. But there's, that attitude, we had a recent Republican debate. Listen, if the moderators aren't going to ask questions about like AI or robotics, even though that's like in the news, well, fine. I guess it's hard for the candidates to talk about these issues. But Andrew Yang used technology as a way of promoting himself back in 2020. And any of those Republican candidates could have just picked up a newspaper and read about all the advances we're seeing, certainly AI, but in energy, in space, and talked about that, even built a campaign around it. And they have chosen not to do that. So coming up with a candidate, I'm really not sure who that would be. I think the opportunity is out there for someone to grab it. Hopefully they will, but they're very much interested in talking about other things. But if Republicans aren't even talking about taxes, I don't know what else they're going to talk about. AI will do about.
Well, I was going to suggest Manny Iglesias.
Oh, that's a trolling comment.
But even if we actually look at the national level, I can think of two individuals on both sides who I think personify a lot of things, like Mitch Daniels, right? Obviously, can do kind of Republican, right? Very sort of like, very has done a lot of interesting stuff on higher ed and so forth. On the Democratic side, you can think of a guy like Jared Polis, Colorado. Okay. So I don't think it's like there's a shortness here, but look, why did you go? So one thing I really want to ask you is, why did you call this book The Conservative Futurist? Is it because up-wing futurism is inherently conservative? Or is it the opposite? Are you worried that conservatives will shy away from futurism and its implications, and you're trying to actually explain to them why the things you're talking about are inherently, amenable to their worldview?
Well, I certainly didn't want to hide the fact that, I'm a self-described conservative. I work at the American Enterprise Institute. Who am I kidding, right? But I'm deeply concerned about having a political party and one of the two sort of big, broad, philosophical movements in this country just ignore, and not just ignore the future, but actively fear the future. Fear that the future is going to be controlled by an elite who, and it seems like a joke, make us eat bugs and take away our cars or our internal combustion engine cars, and have no positive image about the future. One person I mention a lot as sort of one of my role models for a conservative futurist is Herman Kahn, who was known in the 60s. He's a nuclear war theorist, but became a very sunny, optimistic futurist and proponent of what he would call techno-capitalism. And when he died in 1983, Ronald Reagan called him a futurist who embraced the future. And that is sort of the attitude that I think I would like to see again on the right. And again, I see very, very little of it that thinks that we can solve problems, that doesn't view the technology sector as the enemy because some people give too much money to Democrats or what have you. Because I think the big problems will require those kinds of answers. And we're not going to get anything done if we have a Republican Party that just doesn't see that even as a possibility.
Well, we sit here, it's a Sunday. Yesterday, we almost had a government shutdown, largely because the Republican Party itself in Congress couldn't get on the same page about what it wanted to do. The polls tell us that Donald Trump will be the nominee for the Republican Party. He spent the last week in Detroit telling auto workers that the reason their companies aren't trolling is because of electric cars. And therefore, the solution to other problems is to get rid of electric cars and go full on gasoline cars. So what do you think having that person in that point of view as a spokesman for the Republican Party and potentially as the next chief executive of the United States says?
Well, he seems to like space, I guess. I guess that's something. Listen, the Republican Party is stuck, and as long as he has a domineering presence, now there will be a Republican Party, I think, stuck in its policy views, but is it really going to have a policy view? I mean, the Trump candidacy isn't about policy; it's about him. It's entirely a movement built around him, his complaints, his feelings about the past election. So it is not currently a party. Republicans love calling themselves a party of ideas. And I think you can make a strong case at one point that they had lots of ideas. Maybe you didn't agree with them, but there are lots of ideas. I don't know what those ideas are. Even on something like taxes. I have no idea. It used to be to become a Republican presidential candidate, you had to have a big, splash, maybe even ridiculous tax platform. Now, you don't need one. Now it's we're just going to extend the Trump tax cuts. We've solved the tax problem. So I think there's a place for someone who has a lot of ideas, and I think these emerging technologies create a natural agenda for someone who wants to grab them. That's not happening. Maybe that's not what Republicans want right now. Hopefully they will want it in the future.
All right, well, enough. Okay, you said a lot of enough positive things. What is the Democratic Party?
Awesome. I got booed about Elon Musk. It's not been happening.
So we'll get to Elon in a moment. But what about the Democratic Party, though? I mean, in the past week, we saw the Federal Trade Commission sue Amazon. You know, that we've known that Lena Khan, from her earlier writings, has a problem with bigness, has a problem with, like, Amazon's model. The Department of Justice is suing Google, separate arguments and so forth. These things have, you know, President Biden was in Detroit saying, yeah, auto workers, you deserve everything you're asking for. Those evil companies are the reason that, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you think the Democratic Party is on these issues? Do you have any more confidence that they are going to carry the torch of, you know, optimism that you
I'm slightly enthused, or slightly more positive, you know, when that they seem to have realized that some people, at least, maybe it's confined to the, you know, the 202 area code, that there need to be reforms to make any of their big ideas happen. And it's very hard to build big projects in this country, and you can cut checks to people, but that doesn't mean stuff gets built. And I gave the example about this factory where they're trying to build a factory to build wind turbines, and they can't get it done because neighbors are complaining that they're cutting down too many trees. Now take that and multiply it by every county in America. So I think there's a realization that currently, and you say is like NEPA, for instance, is that a problem with subsidies? So I think they realize that currently there is a problem, and that's encouraging. When the Biden administration talks about we need to have a more productive economy, that's encouraging. I love hearing Jennifer Granholm talk about nuclear energy. She seems really excited about nuclear energy, nuclear fusion. That stuff is fantastic. But of course, you know, there's a tension between that and you know, rolling back some of those NEPA reforms. There's a tension between that and, you know, siding with the United Auto Workers, whose raises, if you listen to some Wall Street analysts, it seemed like that would be a death knell for these companies. Now maybe the United Auto Workers think, well, they bailed out, you know, auto companies before, they are too important to fail. The government would never let them fail, so we should push as hard as possible because eventually they're necessary for this energy transition and government will support them. I don't know. So yeah, clearly there's an existing tension between people who think there need to be reforms, who think growth is good, who think nuclear energy, which is a great sort of shorthand for someone's views, and those who think, like, it's still 1973 and limits to growth and we're running out of Earth and there's overpopulation and we really don't want to build anything.
So the theme of this conference is slouching towards industrial policy. So let's talk about industrial policy and the perspective you bring to that of conservative futurism. Bidenomics. Now, you ask Biden what Bidenomics is. He says, I don't know what it is, but it's working. Essentially, if Biden passed it, it's Bidenomics. But when I think about Bidenomics, I don't think about the, you know, the $1.9 trillion stimulus.
I do. I think about that one.
Is that right? Okay. Well, the reason I don't think is that, like, that was old-fashioned Keynesian demand stimulus. Now, multiplied by 5, but nonetheless, there was nothing special about it. It was driven by the same kind of, like, policy preferences that Clinton would have had or Obama would have had. And in fact, a lot of the thinking behind it was, this is what Obama should have done. He should have just gone bigger and longer. So I don't actually think that is distinguishing. What distinguishes Bidenomics, in my view, is essentially the fundamental rejection of things like efficiency and liberal markets as good things that we should strive towards. I mean, if you were to look at it as a Clinton or an Obama policy, through the eyes of Larry Summers, who was influential in both. You know, Larry Summers is fully in favor of redistribution, higher taxes on the rich, strong safety net, but he tends to believe that governments are not, you know, better at deciding where capital and labor should be allocated than private markets. And that was a view that was reflected in the policies of the Obama and Clinton administration, right? They generally supported things like free trade and so forth. They generally supported things like cost-benefit analysis and so forth. And if you listen to, for example, a guy like Jake Sullivan, who oddly enough has become the primary spokesman for Bidenomics in many ways, even though national security is his area, he said, we took the ideas of efficiency and productive and the efficient allocation of capital, we took those ideas too far, and the result was too much inequality, too little faith in democracy. China got ahead of us. We weren't ready for climate, we're not ready for COVID. And so that new version of Bidenomics, which is a break from Clinton and Obama, says free, fair trade or worker rights, not consumer welfare, should be the guiding light of things like our trade agenda. It says things like laissez-faire doesn't work. Industrial policy, you know, is now back in vogue. Government should basically tap the shoulder of the private sector and say, these are the industries we want you to emphasize, and so forth. It's not economic growth per se, it's like the distribution of the fruits of economic growth that matter. So this is my interpretation of Bidenomics, and a lot of it can be seen in a series of laws that Biden has signed, like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and of course the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a lot. I mean, you add it up, it's $7 trillion. I mean, it's a lot of money going into industrial policy. Solyndra, forget about it. Okay, that is just a rounding error compared to what these guys are doing. So, what's your take on this, Jim? I mean, I can imagine that part of you likes the, you know, muscular commitment of real resources to things like renewable energy and semiconductors. But what about everything else that goes along with it?
Well, I don't sit up, you know, at night worrying that a deep geothermal startup or a nuclear fusion startup is getting a DOE grant. That means, you know, ideally, I would prefer a carbon price and let the market sort it out. But if we're not going to do that, I think in some areas, I'm not going to worry about that kind of government intervention. But to broadly think that, to use that quote that like, we've gone too far worrying about economic efficiency and markets, I wonder if they would even be saying that if there was, again, this sort of momentary infatuation with China's success and their Made in 2025 policy, where the brilliant engineers in Beijing had figured out the exact sectors they needed to subsidize and then leap ahead in the United States. That does not seem to be happening. And if they can't figure out, where they don't have to go through our convoluted political process, but based purely on science, technology, figure out what are the industries of the future, and then to leap ahead of those industries, what chance do we have? So I'm a free enterprise person. I believe that we need to create an environment where entrepreneurs can take risks. The government has a role. I would like to see a ton more funding for basic research, even some research that may even be called applied research, multiples more. But I think starting with the proposition that we have focused too much on efficiency in an economy that has suffered surprisingly weak productivity growth virtually my entire life. I guess I disagree with that. I had big dreams as a kid. It didn't look like this. Now, we see you're flying cars in your dome cities and your bubble cities under the ocean. You know, I love my smartphone. I wanted more.
So we have just a few minutes. I want to come back to a person who I suggest arouses a lot of emotions in your Elon Musk. So I actually have read...
Right, got me moved. Luring.
Well, look, I have to confess, yours is the second book I've read in the last 10 days. The other one is the Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson, which is a fascinating book, by the way. It went a short book for 600 pages. I think, like in many ways, like to be honest, he personifies upwind futurism. The man is fundamentally driven by grandiose dreams of what humanity can and must achieve, and he has achieved it, through sheer force of will. You mentioned this in your book. He's achieved Moore's law type efficiencies in the cost of space travel. It is not an exaggeration to say that he may, in fact, make it possible, interplanetary transportation possible. But he's also fundamentally a rule breaker in all ways. He questions every requirement. I mean, you learn this in the biography, right? He says, why does it cost $2 million in 6 months for that part? Why can't I have it for $10,000 in 2 weeks? And they deliver. But also in that that's why he can launch rockets faster and more cheaply than anyone else and produce the world's first commercially successful electric car. Yeah, it also puts in a perpetual conflict with the instruments of the state, including many agencies that come in for a lot of criticism by you in your book, whether it's the Federal Aviation Administration, because he took too many chances on that launch, and there was a possibility that one of his rockets would fall onto Houston or something like that. Or there's National Transportation Safety Board, right, which doesn't like the fact that maybe full self-driving isn't really that safe. And of course, with the political establishment, not to mention cultural liberals who despise him not for anything he's done with cars and space travel, but for the anti-woke position he's taken with Twitter. So what are your thoughts on this guy? I mean, does the United States fundamentally need more Elon Musks with all the sort of polarizing baggage that he brings with him? Or is he, on net, perhaps not helping the cause?
Well, when Time Magazine made him, its Person of the Year, I was interviewed for that. This was sort of pre-Twitter purchase. What I focused on was what he was doing with Tesla and what he was doing with SpaceX, which seemed to be not just actually just creating those companies, but the attitude that we had stopped being pioneers as a society, and we should start taking big risks. And if only to make sure that humans were still around 100,000 years from now. That really struck home with me. And do we need more billionaires buying social media platforms? I find the Twitter episode, for me, utterly uninteresting compared to what's going on with Tesla, and especially SpaceX. That we need more of. What I would call super entrepreneur, where we allow entrepreneurs to get very, very rich by creating very valuable things. And some of those things are things that we never thought we would have. Yeah, we absolutely need more of that. I mean, that is sort of the deep magic of the American economy, that we're able to produce more of those than any other large economy. And the day that we can't, or we stop valuing that, dark day.
Last question. The subtitle of your book is How to Create the Sci-Fi World We Were Promised. And I can clearly see from this book that you, like me, read a lot of science fiction when you were growing up. And you've talked about how science fiction in some sense embodies the pop culture meme, how we feel about technology. What work of pop culture, science fiction, contemporary work, to you is most upbeat, encouraging sign you say that maybe this attitude has changed and that the rest of us should all go out and rent from Netflix right away?
Well, I mean, the two easy answers as far as these films are The Martian and the film Interstellar. Interstellar is almost, targeted toward people who might like this book, in which the problem is that we turned our backs on progress and we're very much in danger of extinction. But even movies which are very pessimistic and dystopian, I just see how so easily they can be turned around. One of my favorite examples is a series, I think it was Apple. It's called The Peripheral. It's by William Gibson, and the context is somewhere in the future, 2030s, everything started going wrong. No big thing, but like a little plague here, like a pandemic here, a limited nuclear war here, climate change there, and society started collapsing. But then, in the middle of that, as Gibson writes in the book, which is excellent, science started popping. AI, nanotechnology, it just started popping to the plate. So to me, that book and that TV series, rather than being sort of a dystopian, series, to me, offers a great lesson, which is, let's go, let's hurry up. There is no time to waste. We have big problems, let's solve them now, not 50 years from now. And so easily, I think that's what that show could have been about. But that's the lesson I took away. My name of my newsletter is Faster Please, which is sort of my ethos, Faster Please.
Jim, thanks a lot, and thank you for writing this book.